Hello everybody and welcome back to another video. Today we're going to be recapping and talking about all the fun chaos that took place in the WSL opening weekend here on She Scores Bangers. For an opening weekend that was not supposed to be an opening weekend, actually lived up to expectations for being an opening weekend. The big stars of the show obviously were Aston Villa beating Manchester City and the newly promoted Liverpool taking on and beating the reigning champions Chelsea. All the action kicked off at a sold-out Meadow Park at Arsenal, who took on Brighton and won very convincingly a 4-0 win. Kim Little scored the first goal for Arsenal this season and also is the first goal scorer for the 2022-2023 WSL season. I think that's such an iconic and powerful statement by Kim Little for a player that's been involved in the game for as long as she's been, and to play at the consistency that she plays at, to score the first goal of the season and to hold that title now for the future is just badass, honestly. Arsenal were playing with a deadly high line. They had a very intense high press going on. Their forwards were almost always running at the center backs or the goalie of the other team. Unfortunately, Brighton did have a player be sent off in the 7th minute, so whatever game plan, whatever kind of structure they wanted to implement was ruined quite early on. If you know a thing or two about Brighton, they love to play a low block. They love to have a lot of players in the back, and when you have a player get sent off, you're going to hit that panic button and you're going to have a lot of your players technically park the bus. Actually started the game with a 3-5-1 formation, which is an interesting one. We haven't seen them use that at all last season, so for them to come out with a 3-5-1 formation, I was excited to see it, but that kind of all got ruined when the red cards came out. Arsenal did not look to be phased. They looked to be very prepared to kind of play against that low block. They had Caitlin Ford do a lot of the dribbling, do a lot of that kind of like cutting inside work, doing a lot of the quick passes. She was connecting perfectly with Leah Wolty, Kim Little, Viv. I mean, everybody was just so up high on the field. At times you even had the fullbacks pull up and kind of overload with the winger, so you really would just have Leah Williamson and Rafa in the back. That's it. Everybody was just so far up high the pitch, which is kind of what you want to do. You want to stretch Brighton. You want to keep the ball moving, quick passes. So Arsenal did that very, very well. When Brighton did regain possession, Arsenal's positioning I was very impressed with. They were very good in intercepting the ball, cutting Brighton's passes and regaining possession themselves. Mead got a brace of her own. I mean, she's on fire. She still is on fire. Stina Blackstenius got a goal, as well as Kim Little previously mentioned. I was excited to see Georgia Fox, who's on loan from Chelsea to Brighton, but unfortunately she came up against Caitlin Ford, and Caitlin Ford was 4D was filthy, as everybody was calling her on the weekend. She was just pocketing players and breaking ankles. She had a great game. It was good to see Jordan Nobbs on the pitch. She actually hit the bar and almost scored herself. It looked like she was just on there effortlessly playing around. So as a football fan, you love seeing Jordan Nobbs healthy and back on the pitch. Lena Hurting, the new signing, got some minutes of herself, and I thought she looked brilliant. It wasn't necessarily her work on the ball that surprised me. We obviously know that is a very good aspect of her, but what was really good is her movement. She's very good in dragging players her way and kind of making players track her and mark her as she opens up spaces and kind of options for her teammates. And I think that's such a tricky player to go up against, because not only are they dangerous on the ball themselves, but they're also dangerous off the ball, which just I think adds to the qualities of Hurting. This is not to say that Brighton had a chance or two themselves. They actually had 2 shots that kind of came close, but just it's the overall quality, the clinical. They were just not clinical enough to put that ball at the back of the net. Arsenal also could have probably had 7 or 8 goals, but being a little bit sloppy, a little rusty, I think that's normal for a lot of teams on the opening game. Brighton did have notable misses like Danielle Carter and Rebecca Stott, but it was going to be a hard night for them, I think, regardless if they had those misses or not. Arsenal were looking very, very sharp, very good, very clinical, very intense. On Saturday, we saw United and Reading also have a 4-0 scoreline. And I'm just going to say it, United look scary. United look very, very dangerous, to say the least. It was the captain, Katie Zelm's 100th appearance for the club. She got 2 assists and a goal of her own. Very neatly done. You also cannot forget about the new signing from Brighton, Maya Letitia, who scored 2 goals of her own. Your defender, debut, 2 goals, clean sheet. I mean, some would say this was probably a dreamy debut for Letitia. Good to see Nikita Paris get on the pitch, as well as Leon, the new signings. Lucia Garcia was also having some very fun runs up the wing and connecting with her Spaniards. Ona. Millie Turner, also the English defender who had some medical concerns last season, also came back. She looked very good. I was just also really happy to see, if you know about her story, she did battle with quite a hard medical condition and she was on blood thinning tablets. So for her to come back, play the 90 minutes, I think is just spectacular. She's also like technically another new signing because she just didn't play at all last season. So good to see her back in the mix. United set pieces are a work of art. We already knew this last season. They were always very threatening on set pieces, specifically on corners. But again, they came out on the opening game to remind us that, hey, just in case you forgot, we're letting you know we are very, very dangerous on set pieces. Quick technical break. As I start speaking about Reading, my mic decides to stop working. So we've had to go over to this clip, guys. So if the audio changes, this is probably exactly why you're hearing the difference. They also did lose Deanne Rose quite early on in the first half, which looked to kind of really shake things up for them in a negative way because they just didn't look like they knew what they were doing. It looked like there was no game plan. They were, honestly, in the nicest way, quite pathetic that first half, which is exactly where they conceded all first 4 goals. Second half, they definitely came in and were woken up for sure. I think 4 goals would wake anybody up. They had some moments of brilliance. It's hard to say that they had moments of brilliance when you look at that scoreline, but it was a game of 2 halves, you could say. Not to say that Reading were dominating United or anything, not by any chance, but it did look like a new team out there. Unfortunately for them, though, you can't just play the last 45 minutes. You have to play the entirety of the game. So 4-0, Man United look great. Reading, not so much. They definitely have to go back to the drawing board and figure out why they had that really sloppy start. Moving on to Sunday, it was definitely more than worth it that I woke up at 6 a.m. to watch this incredible game. And I say incredible because it had 7 goals. And so if you're watching this as a neutral, how could you not enjoy a 7-goal game? Perhaps if you are a Manchester City fan, then maybe this was not so fun for you, but I think the neutral fan or the Aston Villa fan were probably having a very, very good time. Now, before we go into what actually happened in the game and the goal scores and everything, I think one thing that has to be talked about is Gareth Taylor. Putting the summer window aside, putting all the losses that he had aside, he just simply had a very, very bad day at the office today. And this is not because of the circumstances around him. It was because he failed his job. The starting 11 for that game only featured 1 new signing. There was a lot of questions of how that midfield is going to do. Have they adapted? And frankly, they haven't. They did very, very poorly. The defense line was also in shambles a lot of the times. What Lucy Bronze and Kira Walsh and even Stanway were so good at is connecting that defense line to the midfield. And what I mean is not necessarily building from the back, but Bronze was very good in driving either up to the wing or driving into the midfielders, perhaps sometimes even driving into that defense line, and you didn't have that Bronze type of player. You also didn't have a Kira Walsh type of player that receives the balls that defense is trying to send. Kira Walsh would drop so deep and help the defense so much, and is really that puzzle piece between the defense and the midfield, even though she is a midfielder and can go up. Like, her role was so important, and it really did show that she held that team for the last 8 years. Okay, maybe that was a little bit of an exaggeration, but what I would do as a manager is probably switch things up. I would probably switch how I'm trying to build from the back. Clearly, I don't have the players that play the football I used to last season, so therefore to adapt, I'm going to use the strength of the new players. I'm going to use the strength of the already players that have been staying here and build around that. But Gareth Taylor didn't think about that. Gareth Taylor stuck exactly with the style of football he was playing last season. And even though he lost pretty much every kind of player that was the crucial part in implementing that, he still went with it. Leah Alexandria, the only one new signing in the start of the was in that CDM position. And this is not to say she's a bad player. I think she's a very, very good player, very young, very talented. If you see her on the international scene, she's very good and she probably has a very bright future. But you're asking her to do something that's just simply not in her game. You're asking her to play a style of football that just doesn't suit her or any of the players around her. Steph Houghton, I thought, just had a bad game overall. She did lose a fair amount of possession, so did Alex Greenwood. But again, they were told to play a game plan that they just simply they cannot execute with the players that they have. It's really simple as. On top of that, they looked like they had no tempo. They were like walking around. It was like they were just taking out their dogs for a walk and just literally no pace. The passing was very sloppy. I mean, everything just was not great. And Aston Villa was very good in detecting that. And we're like, you know what? If they're not going to run for the ball, I'm going to go and get it off you. And that's exactly what they did for the entirety of the 90 minutes. But you also have to give it up for Villa. I mean, they were pressing, they were aggressive, they were making sure they were intercepting the balls, they were making sure that if they themselves dispossessed the ball, they were going to go and get after it. You could see they were full of energy, excitement, heart. They wanted to win that ball, they wanted to win that game. And I think it's not something you see a mid-table team do against the top 3 teams. Usually, a lot of these teams kind of have a low block, or if not a low block, they're just waiting on the counterattack. And Aston Villa was guns blazing. They were out. They're ready to get the ball and get it off to the Manchester City side. They were bringing the fight. Rachel Daly got a brace of her own. I mean, what a debut. Also, very, very good first goal. I don't know if you guys were able to get a chance to see it, but the second half, Manchester City did look a little bit better. They were finally running. At some point, they were even leading 3-2, which is crazy to think that they were 2-0 down and there's 3-2 up and then it was 4-3. That's why it was such a good game. You can take your eyes off of it. Speaking of West Ham, they also got their own 1-0 victory over Everton at home, and Lisa Evans scored her first fully West Ham United player of the season, or fully West Ham United player goal. Leicester City and Tottenham also was a game that noticed 2 absolute worldies. I just want to say both of them were at least 40 yards out of the goal, so just that. Drew Spence also getting her first goal with the North London club. Very positive stuff for her. It's good to see her getting some minutes. Good to see her on the field. Drew Spence actually came out with 2 goals, an own goal and a goal of herself. So a 2-1 scoreline for this one. Finnish midfielder Suominen was the 9 position for Spurs, and I thought that was the oddest thing ever. I don't rate it. I don't like it. I don't know what the hell they're trying to out, but it's not it moving forward. Now, moving on to the last fixture of the week, Chelsea and Liverpool. I personally was probably excited for this one. So let's break down Chelsea a little bit. I think their chaos started right before the whistle had gone off, where Harder unfortunately did hurt her muscle in the warm-up and needed to be replaced by Ingle. If I say I understood that replacement, I'd be lying, because Harder is a very, very she's an attacking player. She goes forward. That's how she thinks. She's an attacking player. In fact, she was lined up with Sam Kerr up in the striker position. You had 2 of them up top, and she was replaced by Ingle, who is a kind of defensive midfielder. She's very defensively minded, so whatever kind of game plan you're trying to impose with Harder, was it really going to work with Ingle? Because they're such different players that I was like, oh, interesting mix-up. We'll see where this goes. I probably would have brought in Kankovic. Fleming would have been a perfect replacement, but she was not available due to illness. But you wanted to bring in a player who's kind of quick on the ball, quick moving, can move the ball forward, and I don't know if Ingle suits that profile. And then a little bit more about the formation. You had Niamh Charles playing on the left back, James on the right back, which I think both probably were the only 2 who had a good game for Chelsea, but both of them are out of position. Charles usually prefers to play on the right. Brighton would have dropped into that left wing back, or, I mean, you have Perisic on the bench too. You could have brought her in, so putting both James and Niamh Charles out of position is not ideal. Again, they did both have very good games. They were probably the only 2 Chelsea players I think that did have a good game, but they're out of position, so you're already setting yourself up for more negatives. This not only isolated Kerr to be the only striker, she was pretty much anonymous the entire game. I really don't think we saw much of Kerr at all. Guro Reiten was just like lost, wandering around, and Kirby was nowhere to be found either, so it was just like there was no flowing kind of like Chelsea at all. Don't get me wrong, I like Ingle and what she's done for the sport, but I just think she was a little too slow today. You needed that middleman to connect everything together, and that was her job. And I don't think she did her job too well this time around. She was not getting the ball, she was not creative enough to be on the ball, and then all that job went over to Cuthbert, which how much can one player do? And so the entire midfield was a little bit dead. I thought the positioning of Buchanan and Bright was not right. I would have switched them all the way around, because where Millie Bright was positioned, they kind of showed all her weaknesses, and that's where all the strengths of Buchanan lie. I know Buchanan didn't have a great game. She did give up the winning penalty, but again, the center backs were out of position. When they would switch that formation around, Bright would end up in the right back position sometimes, which, again, not ideal. The game definitely needed somebody like Jessie Fleming. My Canadian heart was very upset not to see her on there, and Buchanan also had a bad game, so my Canadian heart did go through a lot that game. But let's talk about Liverpool here. They went down less than 5 minutes into the game. They had quite a nervy start. They didn't really have the best of first halves. That second half, it was all Liverpool. Their pressing was incredible. Their work rate, honestly, nonstop. You'd think that they've been in preseason for the past 7 months. And I know what you're going to say. Well, both goals were penalties. I get it, but you have to draw the penalties from going forward at some point, right? In fact, all 3 goals that the game saw were penalties, but you have to be going forward to end up in the box to draw a penalty. They were so good defensively. When Chelsea kind of in that last 10-15 minutes were panicking. Obviously, they needed to score. They were just so good. They were stopping any kind of passage that Chelsea was trying to attempt, any kind of dispossession that Chelsea would go through. They'd be on the ball right away. It was such a great shift from them to do it in their stadium as well. They had a record crowd, so I think for the Reds it was a very, very, very good weekend. Speaking of storyline, I think it was just so funny how it was an American who won it for Liverpool, big Scousers against the reigning champions in England. Like, when you put that all in a sentence, it just sounds so funny. All these negatives, I think Lauren James had an incredible game. She was cooking things up with her dribbling, her feet, such good movement. I think for a player so physically strong, being able to dribble as smoothly as she does is like such a great duo that not a lot of players have. Opening games are usually not to their luck. They've only won out of the 5 last opening games, but nothing to worry about. We just liked a little bit structure. I think maybe Emma Hayes was a little bit kind of tentative to put all the new signings in at once, which is pretty understandable. Next week, though, they do have Manchester City at home, which is probably going to be a bloodbath because both teams are going out for that first point, and so it's going to be very, very fun. We also have a North London derby at the Emirates next week. We also have a Merseyside derby next weekend, so next weekend is a weekend you want to tune in for. Overall, I hope you guys had a good weekend and also enjoyed the show. What are your thoughts on Gareth Taylor and the whole Manchester City situation? What are your thoughts on Chelsea and some of the faults that they showed? As always, to stay updated and to continue enjoying the beautiful game, make sure you subscribe to us here on YouTube and follow us on Twitter for all the updates that you need. I will see you later.